Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Upgrading to SQL Azure, Ask the Experts, brought to you by your Insight Microsoft commercial team. My name is Blair Loveland, your Microsoft Readiness Specialist at Insight, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you're looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and there will be a Q&A during the last few minutes of the presentation. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn this over to our presenters. Guys, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. This is Kevin Feit with the Insight Commercial Professional Services team, focusing on everything related to data and business intelligence. So I've got a few slides that I'll go through along with my colleague, Dylan Lloyd, and then we'll open up the floor for your questions. Thanks, everybody. So agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of migrating to Azure SQL, what a migration to Azure SQL will look like, how Insight can help make your migration easier, and how you'll save some time and enjoy good performance and security with Azure SQL, and last but not least, who to contact to discuss your journey. Okay, so some of the benefits of migrating to Azure SQL, and this is not all of them, but the major ones. So first off, less care and feeding. You don't need to worry about hardware upgrades and maintenance, no Windows and SQL patches and upgrades to worry about, automated backups, and optionally automated tuning. And then next benefit is high availability. So if you use on-premise SQL Server, setting up high availability can be a bit complex, dealing with both Windows failover clustering and SQL configuration. With Azure SQL, the high availability is built right in, so you don't need to worry about that. Scalability. With on-premise, if you need to scale, you might be buying hardware, resizing VMs. It's a much more complicated process. Whereas with Azure SQL, the scalability can be as simple as moving a slider or even doing something from a script if you need to scale up and down on an automated basis. Okay, next piece is security. You automatically get the security features of the latest version of SQL Server. You can, in addition, use firewalls that are provided by SQL to limit access. And finally, there's Azure Defender that can help address and look at any threats. And then cost, you can use your Azure Hybrid Use Benefit to migrate existing licenses that you have for SQL Server Standard Edition or Enterprise Edition with software assurance, and apply those licenses in Azure. And there's also reserved options. So you can pay monthly if you want to just have, not make a commitment and be able to turn things on and off on the fly, or you can reserve your instances and reduce costs. Okay. All right. Next piece, the Azure database options. And let me just share my screen for this one. Okay. So on the Azure SQL database options, you've got a number of options that you can choose. So if you need the full experience of SQL Server, the same as on-premise, you can run SQL Server on an Azure virtual machine. And there you have multitude of choices between Standard Edition of SQL and Enterprise Edition, and of course a number of choices as far as machine sizes. Then second choice is the Azure single database option. And there it's primarily designed for new applications, but sometimes you can use it for existing applications. And it's primarily if you have an application that just uses a single SQL Server database, it's a good option. And it gives you multitude of choices as well for how to pay for it with the DTU pricing that lets you automatically scale the performance, both the memory and the I/O and the CPU all with one slider, or the virtual core option, which is a little bit more like you may be used to with on-premise, that you're going to specify this database gets 4 cores or 8 cores. And then within that, there's even a number of options, whether you're looking for general purpose, which is similar sort of to standard edition, versus business critical, that that would typically be for enterprise edition type of databases. And you also have things like hyperscale for your very large databases, and serverless that lets you scale up and down on the fly. Okay. And then another good option for migration is managed instance. And what this gives is a lot of the benefits of SQL Server on a VM, in that it gives you the complete database engine as well as SQL Server agent, and the ability to host multiple databases within one database server. So for applications that you're moving from on-premise, managed instance can be a lot of times a good fit. So that way, if an application is dependent on multiple databases, it works. The only difference is that it doesn't give you the other components of SQL Server outside of the engine, specifically SSIS, SSAS, and SSRS. If you need those components, then you'd look at SQL Server on a VM. And then managed instance also has the general purpose or business critical, depending on the type of application and the performance that you need. Okay. Okay, so moving to the next slide, the process for migrating to Azure. So it's a pretty straightforward process. You want to assess your database or databases, and then determine what your target's going to be, whether it's going to be Azure SQL single instance, managed instance, or virtual machine, and then determine the target class size or the target class, whether it's standard or enterprise or general purpose or business critical, and size of your server. Plan the migration based on your requirements, as far as like what amount of downtime you can afford for the application. Do you need to do something more complex so that you just migrate with minimal downtime? What's your bandwidth to move the database if you've got a large amount of data that you're moving? And then finally conduct the migration. Okay. All right, so how can Insight help? Really, Insight can help across all those phases. So during the assessment, the automated tools will identify the migration issues, but then the hard part is to determine the mitigation strategies to address the issues that the tools may identify. Planning, having the experience to understand what the most cost-effective way to support the workload and service level is an important aspect. And you can, if you over provision, that's going to cost you money every month. Execution, ensuring that the databases are migrated without any data loss and within your required outage window, is another area where we can help. Security and operations, obviously data is the lifeblood of the business. You want to make sure that you have the right security in place, so we can help with configuring security, setting up backups per best practices and your requirements, and in addition to the other operational aspects. And then finally, tuning. So on the one hand, Azure is great. It makes it easy to scale. But obviously, if a tune database can work with 4 cores, but you choose not to tune it and pay and have 8 cores instead, you're paying the price for that every month. So, an investment in tuning and optimization can really save an organization money. Okay, so I guess, Dylan, I'll hand it over to you to talk about Insight's cloud adoption framework.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Dylan Lloyd. I'm a teammate of Kevin's on the Azure Commercial Professional Services team. I specialize in kind of the, overall Azure stack around migration, security, governance, and things like that. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit with you guys because I know we're talking about SQL here, but I just
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like we may have lost Dylan. So I guess let me just I'll talk about this at a high level, the cloud adoption, and we'll see if Dylan's able to come back and discuss it further. But basically, we're going to go through, help with define the strategy for your cloud migration, do the assessment of your estate. Because I think okay, Dylan, are you back?
I don't know what happened. That was weird.
Okay.
Basically, sorry about that. The cloud adoption framework is basically we will do these kind of things. We'll start assessing and designing your Azure or your cloud environment. We'll, look at the security and access. We'll look at your governance and operations. We'll then go into building a landing zone, kind of looking at DevOps, if that makes sense for you, and do automations, deployment, Terraform, things like that. And then we'll look, once you have that set up in Azure, we'll migrate and modernize. Obviously, anybody can be at any stage of this at any time. And then the last thing is manage and optimize. So we can help you at any of these stages, no matter where you are in your cloud journey. And I just wanted to kind of point that out to you that, we do follow this framework. So we start, if you are at the beginning, we start from the beginning. If you are at a later stage, we can come in and help you at that point too. And then also we have a lot of Azure service offerings as well here. So you can see we have a lot of things called jump starts, cloud economics assessments and different engagements that we can help you with to kind of start your jump start or help you migrate SQL to Azure. So there's a lot of options here from Insight. And I just wanted to kind of point that out to you guys. I'll let Kevin take back the reins for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dylan. So, common question that comes up is, how much is this going to cost? So I did this quick slide to compare the costs of the various options with a couple of different scenarios. One, a relatively small database or small server with 8 CPUs, around 64 gig of RAM, 256 gig of disk. And, this would be like a departmental type of scenario. And then the second one where it's more of a enterprise business critical with 16 CPUs and 128 gig of RAM and a terabyte of disk. So looking at the cost, you can see the SQL VM is going to be your most expensive option, primarily because kind of assuming in all the scenarios you need high availability, so you end up having to provision 2 VMs and incur the licensing cost for those. And then the managed instance and single instance have very similar kind of pricing, but as you can see, like for example, managed instance, it's $1,000 per month, and this is with the key assumptions are that you're reserving the compute for 3 years, but you're paying as you go for the SQL licensing. So if you did have your own SQL license, then you'd be able to use what's called the Azure hybrid use benefit and lower the cost further. So you need to have the SQL license with software assurance in order to be able to do that. And I see one question came in. Is there government or education reduced rates for that. And I'm gonna, Dylan, do you know that one offhand? If you're is the Gov Cloud pricing the same as commercial, or is it discounted?
It is not the same, and it's actually usually more expensive.
Right.
So the discounts have worked in multiple ways. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can come through Insight as your CSP provider, and you can get your support through us and do all that, and you will get basically a 3.995 discount off of all your Azure usage. So that's a great way to easily get through that. The only other way to really get discounts is if you're a very, very large organization or you're a large government and you have some pull with Microsoft and you sign up for an EA, and they sometimes will give you a discount on that. It's pretty rare nowadays. You have to have a lot of pull. So the best way to get that discount is through a CSP provider like us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I guess the other thing I'd add, though, is if you're able to get a discount on your SQL licensing through your enterprise agreement, and I know I've worked with a nonprofit in the past, and they were able to get very good discounts. So that's something that would definitely help, because you'd get your discounted, buy your SQL Server licensing at a discount, and then you would just apply that with the hybrid use benefit. So yeah, that will definitely save your costs. Okay. Azure SQL security benefits, one of the hesitations is, my data is going to be in the cloud. And I'd argue your data is probably more secure in the Azure cloud than it is on-premise, because, you have all the standard SQL benefits in terms of security, the standard user security, and things like TDE available, and TDE stands for transparent data encryption, and that's encrypting the database files, both the live files and the backups for you. And you can do that on premise. With Azure, it's going to be turned on automatically for you. But it also gives you additional network security capabilities and things like Azure Defender that are in the cloud only. And this diagram kind of shows the defense in depth approach of multiple layers of security that you get with SQL in the cloud. Okay, so and I'm going to hand it back to Dylan to talk about the Azure SQL network security.
Yeah, so I just want to talk about this quickly with everybody, because network security in Azure has changed a little bit. If you use these past products like Azure SQL, or there's also SQL Managed Services in the past, those were all always, when they first came up, they were always publicly available over the internet. So yes, they used HTTPS, they were secured by that, but you were accessing them from your network over the public internet. You could whitelist public IPs and do that, but it was all over the public infrastructure. Microsoft has now come out with what's called private endpoints, and private endpoints basically allow you to attach these past services directly to your virtual network, and allow you now to access them over your VPN or ExpressRoute connections, your private dedicated connections into your virtual network in Azure from your on-premise environment, as well as VMs or other services you're running in Azure. You now can actually have the traffic go over your virtual network versus going over the public network or going over Microsoft's network and leaving your private network. So it's, if possible, if you have this right, I always stress to use private endpoints. There are some things you need, like DNS infrastructure. You have to set up a DNS forwarder in Azure if you need to access those past services from your on-premise environment. So just some things to think about. And obviously, if you need any help with this, we can always help you out with that as well. So you can just reach out to us at that time. That's it, Kevin. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, and then Azure Defender is a great feature that people aren't always aware of. It's available for SQL Server on VMs, Azure SQL Database single instance, as well as managed instance, and it has and also just to mention Synapse Analytics. If anybody's looking for a data warehouse based on SQL, that Synapse Analytics is a great product for that. So it's got two components to it: a vulnerability assessment and advanced threat protection. So the vulnerability assessment is a scheduled scan, typically done weekly, and it will look for vulnerabilities like accounts with high privilege, like system administrator accounts, and not following best practices, like if you have TDE disabled. And it will let you establish a baseline. So the first time you run it, it may say 3 users are system admins, and you expect that. But now let's say I'm one of the system admins. I know I'm about to get fired. And I'm going to say, okay, let me go add another admin account for myself so that after my account gets terminated, I still have a backdoor. When I do that, when the scan runs, it's going to show that this 4th admin account has been added. And that way you can proactively see that and address it before it becomes an issue. So it's great feature that you get by having this Azure Defender enabled. And in addition, it will do things like show up in Security Center, a list of recommendations, and look for things like SQL injection vulnerabilities, so that it's monitoring the SQL that's going to the database, and is able to see things like, hey, this SQL looks like it could be used for SQL injection. You guys really should take a closer look at that, so you can again proactively get in front of that. And if anybody's following the news, things like the Kaseya security incident, SQL injection was one of the ways that the bad actors were able to get past Kaseya's defenses and spread the ransomware. So so it's definitely a real threat, and one that Azure helps you stay in front of. Okay, so who to contact if you're already working with Insight? Contact your account executive. And if not, there's a link on the Insight Contact Us page where you can either call a number or fill in a form to get more assistance with your Azure migration. So that concludes the presentation. And now hopefully folks have some questions. And if you want to type in any questions, and we can help answer them.
Hi, Kevin and Dylan. This is Dan. While we wait for questions, I had one for you, kind of for both of you. What do you feel are some of the most important lessons that you've learned about doing the cloud migrations?
That's a great question. Thanks, Dan. So, so one thing a few things to be aware of. It's very important to do the assessment and identify any issues before running the migration. So Microsoft has a tool called the Database Migration Assistant that you can use to do the assessment. And then another piece to it is if it's a vendor application, since the assessment's only going to look at the code that's in the database itself, I'd always recommend contacting the vendor to make sure they're going to support your preferred option before doing the migration. Or if they won't give you the support, then be prepared that you want to be able to do a test and make sure everything's functional before migrating, because as I was saying, the assessment may not be perfect. And then another thing I would also suggest is, I think a lot of organizations want to just say, okay, let me just get to the cloud, and they'll choose the SQL virtual machine option to get there as quickly as possible. But in many cases, you can save money and reduce your administrative overhead by looking at the managed instance instead. So, it may be a little bit more work to do preparation and possibly mitigate any issues with the managed instance migration, but for that small investment, you can end up saving a lot of money and the intangible time and management by going with the managed instance option instead.
Yep, and just add to Kevin's answer a little bit there on the full, if you're talking about an assessment on the, if you're moving, VMs obviously to Azure, or, you're moving SQL to Azure, it's also good to run an assessment, like a cloud economics assessment on your full stack that you're moving to Azure as well. to make sure you're not over provisioned when you move to Azure, because it could cost you a lot of money. So we call those cloud economics assessment, and we have a team that does those. So that's something else we offer as well that can help you kind of look at what you really should be running in Azure when you move. So that's a big on that.
Right. Yeah. And that's another good point, is that, sometimes like if the project's kind of initiated by the DBA, it'll just talk about moving the databases, but you really want to think about moving the application. Because, typically it's not going to be best practice to leave the application on premise while you move the database to Azure. You really want to look at it as a whole, and consider the application components as well as the database during the migration. All right. Any other questions? And in the 5 minutes or so that we've got left in the session.
I can ask a follow-up to that. I know that the cloud economic assessment is one of the Insight options. Are there any other of the services that Insight provides more recommended over the others before migrating to the cloud?
I'll start that one, Kevin. I mean, I think there's a lot. I think it depends on the customer and kind of where they are in that cloud adoptions framework journey. So like if they're at the very beginning, they haven't done anything in Azure or anything in the cloud, there's a couple options there. Maybe, for the smaller SMB size companies, we have these things called the Azure Jumpstart, an IaaS or a PaaS Jumpstart that can jumpstart them into the cloud, get them kind of ready. We have a small education session for them and stuff like that, and do that. We also do that, and with a bigger landing zone option with custom statement of works. So if they're beginning right there, the jump starts are a great option for people to be able to get into there, learn a little bit about, how Azure works, or, whatever cloud you're going into. It allows you to give you that basic knowledge. So we have those jumpstart offerings. That's a great option. But also we can scale those up to larger options as well with the bigger landing zones and things like that for larger customers. And then obviously if they're down the road, we also have options for migration workloads. Like we have an option where we will get everything set up for the migration. If you're migrating lift and shift, this is very straightforward. We set up the servers to replicate your servers to Azure, and then we migrate those servers to Azure based on that cloud adoption frameworks assessment. So we have lots of options there. And, I could spend a lot of time talking about them. I don't think we have the time right now. But best option would be reach out to your account executive, and we will talk about where you are in your cloud journey, and then we can find the best option for you.
Yeah, we also have a team of a couple of us that focus on just helping you create an itinerary no matter where you are in your journey. So if there's a particular need you have, I'll throw my email. This is Joseph Miller. I'm part of the team on the business development side, and we can help you with these ideation sessions or the assessments and all that, and just take you along the itinerary based on wherever you are. So,
yeah, and definitely if you're working with SQL Server on premise, I would urge you to get educated on SQL on Azure. There's Microsoft has a lot of great learning materials at learn.microsoft.com. So if you want to just do your own education, that's a great starting point. And of course, Insight's here to help you get further as needed. But for the most part, your world's going to be much easier. But yeah, there are some things to be aware of as you start moving to the cloud, and the more educated you are, and the better you're able to help sell your management on the benefits of it. That should help you in the long run.
All right.
I guess no more questions.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. So I guess we can give one more call out. If there's any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box here so we can get them answered for you. While we wait for some questions to arrive, this is episode 3 of our Upgrade to SQL Azure Ask the Expert series. So please keep an eye out for the invite for session 4, which is going to be, I believe, on the 28th. So that should be a really great episode as well. And you will receive a thank you for attending link today. If you'd like to review this session or share it with someone who was not able to attend today, we do encourage you to do so. And guys, how would did we cover how someone would reach out to you? Or do you want to give one last call out to how they can reach out to you with any further questions after the webinar, or to ask further questions?
It sounds like they added some things. I mean, best way to reach out to us is reach out to your account executive, and then they can get you to who you need to go to for that. I think was it Jason? I think also put his email in there, and gave him to contact him as well.
Awesome, thank you. So I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so I think we can go ahead and conclude today's session. So again, if you have any other questions, please reach out. And we do hope to see you on our 4th episode in 2 weeks, same time, same channel. And we hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. Any closing comments, guys? And we'll call it a day.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining, and looking forward to working with you further.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest
Thank you,
of the
everyone.
day.